be such a role, whether the role should be large, should be small, should be all-encompassing, or should be very limited. I think the starting point in discussing the theme should really be definition. What do I mean by political Islam as I speak? I do not mean what Western media and governments tend to usually use in their presentations of political Islam, which are the more flamboyant, radicalized, fringe elements who, to be fair, never cease to amaze us by their barbarity and distance from the true essence of the religion. In that scope, political Islam is effectively equivalent to Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, Daesh, ISIS, or any similar permutation. I also do not believe that the definition of political Islam is the one used by regional regimes that see political Islam as any organized force seeking to acquire political authority and power in a given country. In that definition, political Islam is equal to the Muslim Brotherhood or any similar organization that has the same goals. The political Islam that I want to put forward to you is a much broader, much more complex phenomenon that has really, over the past decades, penetrated all the layers of society and people across Arab and Muslim countries. Its adherents, knowingly or unknowingly, essentially believe that religious teachings should play, indeed must play, a greater role in the political, legal, and social fabric of society. They also believe that it should play a role in the economic functioning of the society. This role and the scope of the role is the crux of the point I made. The fact that such a role or support for such a role is quite widespread is factual. We can disagree on the size of the support, but the net conclusion is it does exist. The question is, what exactly is the scope of that role? The role may be very minor, as in the imposition of specific dress codes, and we've seen incidents of that for and against Egypt recently, to quite draconian, like attempts to resurrect a caliphate to save Darul Islam, the House of Islam, the Islamic nation, from its current problems and endemic failures, which is what ISIS, Daesh claims to be trying to do in northern Iraq and Syria. If we accept that what has evolved over the past 30, 40 years, effectively, if I want to take a watershed event for regional developments, after the 1967 war. The 1967 war marked the death of secular Arab socialist ideologies in the Middle East and left the room open for other ideologies to emerge and to acquire support. Since that time, changes in the educational system, over political support by governments which have cultivated such groups, media penetration, and the general disillusionment and absence of any viable secular alternative has enabled political Islam to gain ground and to enjoy a very significant and growing presence across Arab and Muslim societies, including Egypt. This cannot be ignored or sidelined, in my view. It's also interesting to note, and that is a point rarely raised, that the policies used by political Islam, or more specifically organized groups within political Islam, to provide social services to support the poor and the needy have resonated very well within populations that have a lot of poor and a lot of needy. And it's very much aligned with where I see the economic compass of societies in the larger population, lower income, Arab and Muslim states, to essentially being some form of left-of-center orientation. Essentially a social democratic format of society, without being verbalized specifically, is where I think the hearts and minds of the majority of the people today stand. That is a personal view, not a scientific conclusion that I put forward to you. And Egypt, needless to say, is a case in point in that. Very simply put, let me use the following analogy. The modern Arab or Muslim world and its current state of affairs cannot and would not accept the emergence of the new Kemal Atatürk, the ultimate secular ruler of a Muslim state, nor would they even accept a Habib Bourguiba, the very liberal Tunisian version of a hybrid secular Islamic mode of doing business. The pendulum has swung too far in another direction for that to be a viable option. So what's the logical conclusion? I'm not an academic, I'm not a political science. What's the practical implication of this? I think the practical implementation is very simple. If you have a stable, growing segment of society present that you cannot sideline and ignore, you have to find a way to integrate and mobilize. Because if you do not integrate and mobilize, we are back to the old cycle of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and onwards of treating the issue in a security political context, and that ultimately neither achieves the problem of breaking the back of the movement, because as I said, we're not discussing Al-Qaeda or the Muslim Brotherhood, we're discussing general, consensual, wide-held views regarding the role of religion in society, which in my view have become entrenched. The ultra-secularists, those that are completely against this, and I would imagine there must be some in the audience today, in my view, by having absolute complete opposition to what I'm trying to put on the table, are acting in a way identical to radical Takfiri fundamentalists on the other side of the spectrum. By completely not accepting the middle position existing, you're delaying any form of compromise, and by delaying compromise, you're creating friction and conflict. Friction and conflict are not good for business, not good for the economy, not good for the livelihood of any state, Egypt or other. Now, I fully appreciate that this view is, or could be, controversial, or not to the liking of my respected audience, but I believe policy decisions and assessments have to be based at looking at all possible options, from the one end of the extreme to the other end of the extreme. And on the basis of the different advantages and disadvantages of any proposal, the correct policy will hopefully be adopted by any of them. Now, I say this, and just to be on the record and very clear on this, that seems quite apt, given what's, I don't know the protocol.
I'm an Arab by background, but did not live or work in the Arab world for most of my life. I've been in the US for over 50 years. So it was a great opportunity to contribute and help out in any way I can. And what I consider to be a very important institution is a center of excellence in a region that desperately needs centers of excellence. So Nabil also said that we are very serious people. So I'm going to start out by telling you a serious story. Some of you may know about an old TV program in the 1950s and 60s called I Love Lucy. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, who were husband and wife, both live and TV. had this wonderful program that now has been translated into about 80 languages and continues to run for those of you young ones. You may be able to see some reruns in there. There's a very poignant episode in which Desiano Ernest comes into his house, his apartment, opens the door, and he sees Lucy on all fours looking for something. And he says to her in his Cuban-American accent, Lucy, what are you looking for? And she says, I'm looking for my earrings. And she keeps on looking, and he says to her, trying to help her, did you lose the earrings in the living room here where she was? No, she said, I did not lose it in the living room. I lost it in the bedroom. But the light is much better here. So as an economist, as an investment banker, I'm always looking for the right place to look. And in the midst of this mayhem in the region and the confusion that's taking place over there and the violence, I have always believed in the link between economics and politics. And I thought, you know, my forte and my understanding of economic things are much better. So I would not be able to comment on the political side, but I will comment on the economic side and the economic underpinning that the region has been undergoing for the past 10, 15 years, and maybe longer. And where is it now, and what are the prospects of the future? And in doing that, I sort of evoked some of the images of Charles Dickens' idea of Tale of Two Cities. Was the best of time and there was the worst of time. And as I reviewed the region for the last 10 or 15 years, I thought that concept of metaphors of the best of time and the worst of times are very apt metaphors for describing the people and the situation in the region. You had a period of contradictions that occasionally gave people an illusion. I believe it was an illusion of hope, but it also included periods of despair as we have gone through these cycles from time to time. So Adel gave a relatively sort of pessimistic picture. If that didn't depress you, I think listening to me probably will do the job. If the last 10 years have been periods of mixed hopes and pessimism, I think the period ahead is decidedly grimmer and probably long-lasting. And it's long-lasting because not only of where the situation of the region is at right now, but also because as the Arab world was dealing with its own internal issues, the world has been changing. And the world has been changing at a rapid pace in many ways that have changed the way people work and operate, and probably will do more so in the future. There's a school of thought of which I'm a member that believes we are on that the digital technology is coming to a point where its applications is broadening and widening, that we're on the verge of a second industrial revolution that will change the way of life, the way the industrial revolution changed that. And instead of industrial revolution this time, is more of a digital revolution. One of the key areas in which that Mr. Laban touched on, that technology has evolved, is that it evolved in one of the key sector for the Arab economy, and that is energy. And I'll touch briefly on that development because it's very critical to the region. And as a segue into doing that, I would like to remind you that there's huge correlation, very close correlation, between the performance of the economies of the oil-producing countries in the region and the non-oil producing economies of the region. There is, by statisticians and economists' jargon, about a 75% correlation between the performance of the economies of oil producers and the economies of the non-oil producers in the Arab countries. The linkages are clear, and I don't want to go into them, They happen with some leads and lags, but what happens in Saudi Arabia will ultimately impact Egypt, and will ultimately impact Morocco, and will ultimately impact other countries in the region within a relatively short period of time. So the economic cycles are not independent, they're highly correlated. What has become clear to me in looking at this region is that probably the past decade will be remembered as a period of missed opportunities. It's a period of missed opportunities to restructure and to reposition the economies of the region, not only to bring them to current era, but also to prepare them for a competition in future times. I don't know why the region did not prepare itself for that change. I have no idea why, for example, it missed an opportunity. There are theories about that, and some relate to politics, some relate to culture, and some relate to inertia, and some relate to governance. But whatever combination of those regions, the fact is that it has missed an opportunity. And what happens is, as you observe those changes, is that during times of rising times, complacency sets in, and people just simply sit there and enjoy the gusher. And during times of bad times, paralysis sets in, and governments step back. And what's important about the fact that governments did or did not do things is that governments dominate, for the most part, the economics of the region. They control between 40 and 60%, sometimes as high as 80% of the region's economies from one country to another. And they control it across the board, from the management of resources, ownership of resources, employment, spending policy, the whole bit. So, there was some periods of good time, and they did take advantage of it to some extent. And there was a period of time in the past decade in which things looked pretty positive. Money was flowing in, and it was getting sort of spread out in a reasonable way. The region sort of felt that there was some continuity of good time. As it turned out, and as I was expected, that was very unsustainable. And now I believe that the bad times are probably going to be longer lasting and will take some time. There are some silver lining, as Mr. Laban had mentioned, that may force some parts of the region to begin to look at itself and begin to depend on itself instead of outside help. But that is still a question mark. This change is also happening at a very inopportune time for the region. As more and more Asia grows, US and big powers' attention is shifting and rebalancing to Asia. Demographers expect that somewhere between 7.5 billion of the world population will be residing in Asia by the year 2050. This is out of 9.5 billion. And clearly, trade, commerce, economics, political, and other issues will be focused into that area. In the last period, 10 years, the region's economy, as I said, did very well. It actually grew by an average of about 5 times its average growth over the preceding 30 or 40 years. So that's the reason why I think hope and expectation of continuity was beginning to set in. But that also brought with it a complacency. Government spending was rising, and was rising very fast, and it accelerated right in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, particularly in the Gulf countries, but also in other countries as well. It's a way of sort of bribing the people and giving them some expectation of hope, but changing attention. Saudi budget and Saudi spending has risen by about 5 times what it was in the year 2000. It locks them into situations where governments, when they give, they're appreciated, but when they stop giving, the dynamics change quite a bit. I've estimated that because of this decline in oil prices in the past 6 months or a year, that the budget in the Gulf countries, GCC countries, led by Saudi Arabia, will be rising to a point where it will probably be closer to about 25-30% GDP. Government budget in Saudi Arabia for this year, 2015, which started out with a deficit of $39 billion, $40 billion, approximately 20% of the budget, is rapidly approaching $150 billion, which is close to about 65-70% of the budget spending. That is clearly unsustainable. It's not something that you can rely on. And it has implications to a number of countries that have been beneficiary of the Saudi and other Gulf countries largesse, Egypt being one, Morocco, Jordan, Bahrain, other countries. So there's quite a bit of concern that there is going to be a lack of continuity in this. And these are fairly substantial resources. Abu Dhabi alone was giving Egypt last year, in 2013, 2014 prices, about 15% of its entire oil revenue, annual oil revenue. When oil prices come down, the revenues come down. So the subsidies the giving is smaller, but it continues to be a very large portion of their revenue. And as the revenue declines and shrinks, their ability to maneuver so that they can give people their own people money and others becomes more and more constrained. So I'm going to touch very briefly on 4 issues about the economies of the region and bring us to the present, and then leave what happens next to questions and answers. Focusing first on the economies of the region. The one thing that's very common among the economies of the region is a very high and stubbornly high double-digit employment rate that ranges from an average of about 10% in some countries and rises to as much as about 18 to 20% in other countries. Worse, and that's true for the oil producers and as well as non-oil producers. Worse than that is the fact that unemployment is much higher among the youth. And because the youth represents a larger portion of society, unemployment hits the youth at a much harder than it hits the adults in many ways. This clearly has both political and social problems. Other problems related to unemployment is the fact that there's a very low participation rate among the labor force in the region. Average participation rate, meaning the labor force that is working compared to the overall labor force of eligible age for work. The average around the world is about 60%. It's higher in some countries, it's lower in others, but the average is about 60%. The Arab world's labor participation rate is 30%. For women, it's even lower. It's half the men's labor participation rate. Productivity of labor, what do you get out of manpower that you're using, is about half international OECD average. So in the Gulf countries, for example, the average pay for labor, the cost of hiring people is about 80% of what labor produces. That means you're hiring people to pay them instead of producing something to the economy, which accounts quite a bit for the poor performance